Hello there, listeners, and welcome to a special episode of Blessed Are the Binary Breakers. I'm your host, Avery Smith, and I come to you a bit earlier than usual. The thing is, something big is happening in the United Methodist Church right now, and it's got a lot of LGBT plus Methodists and their allies worried. Starting very soon, on February 23rd and going through the 26th, is a special session of the UMC General Conference. The outcome of this conference will determine things like whether all LGBT folks can be married and ordained within this denomination. I was lucky enough to get a lifelong Methodist onto this show to tell me, and by extension all of you, just what is at stake here. Adam Richards is a non-binary Methodist studying in Texas. They already work at a church there and are hoping to attend seminary next year. It amazed me how much I could hear the Spirit of God in Adam's story as they told me about their worries and fears, but also their great love for the UMC, and told me their reasons for staying in a denomination that sometimes hurts them. It is my hope that hearing a personal story from a queer Methodist who will be very directly affected by the outcomes of the UMC General Conference might help people understand how vital it is to let us tell our stories. When you hear real-life experiences, it should help make real for you the fact that actual people whom God loves and calls to participate in the church in various ways, are going to be impacted by this conference and all decisions in all denominations, all faith communities regarding sexuality and gender identity. And I just want to give you a heads up. There will be swearing in this episode. I think Adam has every right to be swearing as they talk about this thing that is going to have a huge impact on their life, their ordination, their career, the lives of people they care about. So please join me in learning a bit more about this general conference.
So I'm not going to bore with all the bureaucratic details other than to mention the fact that the UMC loves bureaucracy. But we have like a legislative body that usually meets every 4 years called General Conference. And it's literally 2 weeks. All the Methodists, like delegates from all the Methodist annual conferences in the world go and meet and basically make all of the decisions they need to make for the next 4 years. Real good system. We do it in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yours is only every 4 years? I'm
Yep.
Presbyterian. We do it every 2 years.
That's smarter, honestly. But so what's basically been happening is like within the Book of Discipline, there's these restrictions that say there's like one paragraph that says like clergy can't perform same-gender weddings. There's another one that says like clergy can't be like LGBT. The T's complicated. I can get into that a little bit.
Okay.
That's a fun time. That's a whole separate thing. But and then you have there's also like a line in there that says like homosexuality is like fundamentally incompatible with like Christianity or something like that. Like really gross.
And is the language for being LGBT, is it like you can't be a practicing LGBT person? Yeah, that's what it used to be in PCUSA, my denomination.
Right.
And just the wording is ridiculous.
Oh, I'll do like a little bureaucrat, like a side there. Practicing means very different things depending on your district superintendent, which is like another level of like method. So they have to approve you to be ordained, certify you as a candidate for ministry. And some people like practicing, like for some like district superintendents, practicing means like you identify as like LGBT or even T sometimes, like because a lot of people will just lump that in there because they don't know what they're fucking talking about. And sometimes it means it's like, oh, well, only if you're like dating someone. So if you're like single, you can like be gay, but that's still fine. You just can't you just have to be single for the rest of your life. Fine, air quotes. And then there's another layer on top of that where like sometimes it'll be like, oh, you can do basically whatever you want as long as you're not having gay sex,
Right.
or like same gender sexual relations, which is just kind of like that. Actually, Barclay, who's a non-binary minister, they talked about this in an interview they did where they had when they were trying to get ordained in the Central Texas Conference, which is really conservative. And there was like a discussion with like 400 clergy. We're all like having this debate trying to determine whether they had ever had sex with their partner.
Oh my gosh.
Which is just like,
that's so invasive.
Right. Like, I would say this as someone who's been a lifelong Methodist. Even I would have been like, oh, yeah, fuck this. I'm out. Like, I'm like, the fact that the fact that they went on to get, like, they moved to another conference up in Illinois, and they got ordained up there. The fact that they were still willing to stick with the church really is a testament, really just to the resilience of, like, LGBTQ plus people of faith. Like, just like, that's, like, having that just heaps of spiritual abuse just levied on you, but then like still being like this is not the church, like the word of God is not like this, and you just feel like you have to keep going. And I don't fault people who feel like they need to leave the church. Like, I understand, but kind of hopping back to the General Conference thing, because I realized I never finished that thought. It's again, there's layers to this, so it gets kind of complicated to talk about. So basically, General Conference meets every 4 years, legislative making body, and every 4 years, the language that was put in, the first like anti-LGBTQ plus language was put in 1972, which is 4 years after the United Methodist Church like reunified all the Methodist denominations that had split as a result of segregation. So like already we go and do basically the same shit and are already fucking up already. So that was really cool. Clearly learned nothing from the previous 100 years of discriminating against people. And so like every 4 years, it's basically been like a massive clusterfuck like at General Conference, because there's all these competing petitions from like, progressive ministers who like want to get rid of this language. And then there's like, really conservative, like, delegates who like want to like really crack down on LGBTQ plus people in the church and the people who support them. And it's just this back and forth. And as a result, like basically nothing gets done because all of the legislating is focused on that. And then there's no progress made on that. So things really came to a head in 2016, which was the last General Conference, where the denomination almost went through a chaotic schism. Like it almost just fell apart, like almost completely fell apart. Like not like an orderly division of property. It was just about to be like, all right, everyone's out, like this is done, like kind of deal. At the last minute, the bishops stepped in and were basically like, okay, we're gonna table everything like LGBTQ plus related at this conference, and we're gonna host a special General Conference 3 years from now, because I'm sure that extra year is, And so they're like, okay, you're gonna host this like 3 years from now, and they eventually, they also went and developed like plans for the denomination going forward. And the three main plans are there's the traditionalist plan, which is basically a status quo, but even harsher enforcement of the rules. There's the connexional conference plan, which is basically like separate denominations, but under one like kind of global umbrella, theoretically sharing resources. And the plan that was endorsed by the Council of Bishops, which is the one church plan, which would allow churches to decide whether they can like marry LGBTQ or perform same-gender marriages, and would remove the language from the Book of Discipline opposing like the incompatibility language, and would allow for the annual conferences to decide whether they will ordain LGBTQ plus people.
I think that's what PCUSA ended up doing. We're one denomination where individual sessions and presbyteries make the decision.
Yeah, and so for context, it is February 16th right now. This is being recorded. And conference, I believe, is the 23rd through the 26th. It's really soon after this, and no one has any idea what's gonna. There's this a splinter group called the Wesleyan Covenant Association, who's basically opposed to any plan that would pass that even like gives an inch to like us as queer people, basically. That's like that they just said we're gonna leave the church and we're gonna do everything in our power to basically fuck over the denomination by like taking like money and stuff as well.
Great.
Because it's very very Christian thing to do. That's not motivated by spite and hatred at all. There's that, but no one really knows what plan's gonna pass, or if they do nothing. That's also an option, which would be fucked up in and of itself. Basically, there's like real chance that like every church is basically gonna have to take a vote on whether they like remain in the UMC. Like, well, first off, it's just gonna kill a lot of churches. Like, if you're like the church I work at and is like has been declining in membership since the 70s and only has has 200 members and worships like 70 on a good Sunday, and you're still kind of working through this as a congregation. Like, I'm out for at least as bisexual to that congregation, but I don't know if they know anything about trans stuff. But it's really just kind of like I don't want to deal with this right now, like kind of thing. But like, and everyone's been super nice to me, but it's just kind of one of those things. It's like, it's a mostly older white congregation. I don't know what's going to happen there, or if like, and having to like watch that happen. And again, with this whole process, have no say in it, basically, but have to face all of the consequences is exhausting. It's like, it determines like my entire like future, because it's like, am I going to be able to get ordained in this church and be able to become a commissioned candidate and be able to access scholarships because of that? Like, can I continue working at the church I work at? Like, because I wouldn't want to work at a church that decides the Wesleyan Covenant Association's all that. Like, that's horrifying. People like me are the ones who like have to deal with all the consequences of this. If like the one church plan like passes, like the conservatives in the church, they don't lose anything. It's just, this seems like the sheer thought of having to share ministry space with where people just upsets them that much. It's really frustrating and annoying, and it makes me wonder, like, why am I here? Like, it's that kind of like, why am I here? That's just a question I've been thinking about a lot, and I kind of like boil it down to like a few things. One, I'm not doing anything wrong. It's the other people who have the problem. Like, I have done nothing wrong, so like I don't deserve this treatment. Two, I'm a Wesleyan, like, so I can't just like hop denominations. Like,
you like the theology,
right? Like, that's what people tell me, and they're like, why don't you join like the Lutheran Church, or why don't you join like PCUSA? And I'm like, no disrespect to you, but like, I'm not a Calvinist.
Right. Oh, believe me, I am not a Calvinist either.
The other things are like, I've been given my whole life to the church. I've done the whole youth group thing. I have 7 years in choir, help like a campus ministry, like grow. I've worked for say 2 churches at this point, and one like Methodist affiliated internship. You can't take that away from me. Like, I've like put my head on the line here. Like, I've kind of like paid my dues. Like, and I think the last thing really was like, really it's for like the younger people in the church. A couple of examples that come to mind immediately were both at Arapahoe and at Chapel Hill. I usually like, I'm pretty open. I oftentimes like wear like super duper queer themed shirts and stuff. I've had like, younger like people like come up to me and they're like, oh my God, like, like, your shirt's so cool, or like, I'm really glad like you work at this church and you're gay. Like, that's so awesome.
Yes.
Like, and like, that's like really, that's the part of this that like really like kind of keeps me here, because it's like, those people have hope now. Like, they see someone who is active and part of the faith and is also living into their identity. And that's something I didn't have when I was little. Yes. Like, I had no role models there. And if I can be that, then it's worth it.
Yes, I am so with you there.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's just kind of like the big overview of like general conference related stuff. Other than there's a couple more things I want to mention. Is one, most churches have no idea that this is coming, at least congregationally, so that's going to be a big surprise.
Yeah.
Because the whole denomination has kind of wanted to push this to the side for a long time and like prop up this facade of unity. And so, churches just wouldn't talk about it. And so these issues are just kind of left to fester. Like, on top of that, like, because we haven't, like, figured out, like, the same gender marriage thing, like, trans stuff is not even a discussion that gets had.
Yeah, you mentioned that before, that there's a difference.
Most churches, like, even, like, a lot of progressive churches, Methodist churches, like, self-identified progressive, are, like, really kind of 90s progressive. Like,
oh
they're
my
like,
gosh, yes.
Yeah, they're kind of like all about like gay people, but like they're not necessarily like hostile towards trans people. They're just like I have no clue what you're talking about. Like the church I interned at over the summer, this past summer, which I will name drop because they are genuinely great. Like they are great people. They are willing to learn. Like they are just awesome people. I love that internship, and I don't mean this as like a swipe at them. It's Oakland United Methodist in the neighborhood in Dallas. Go there. They're really cool. Like, a pastor like came up to me and she was like, I need you to explain like trans stuff to me, because like this is not something that I have like ever been exposed to, and I really want to like do right by this community, my congregation. Like there are like gay men here. This is like a direct quote from one of the congregants. It's like, I didn't figure out what transgender was until like last year, and that was a congregation I had. That's a conversation I had like this year. And it's an older congregation, and so, but like that's kind of like, but that's where like a lot of like the churches are at.
Yep. And sometimes they'll know some stuff about trans stuff, but not anything about specifically non-binary, gender queer stuff.
Right. Like, yeah, and that's been like that especially has been like an education opportunity. And just like making sure like pronoun usage is correct. There was a pastor at my home church, which is Arapahoe. I had to mention an email. I'm like, hey, like, because they did a whole like they mentioned me in like the context of the sermon, it was really beautiful. I don't know if it's recorded. It was really beautiful. But they used the wrong pronouns on accident, and I was like, hey, you forgot my pronouns, and they were like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. Yeah, and it's just like but like, and I'm maybe it's just I have low standards or something, but like the intention's there, and that's really what matters to me. And it's like it's not these people's fault necessarily, because they've been fighting another fight. Like they're stuck on like this is the thing that's like all consuming, and it consumes all church debate. Like and it's just it's silly and it's exhausting, and I like finding like explicitly trans affirming stuff or like ministry super hard. Like also I just want to plug this because it's great. The same church I interned at, Oakland, they're actually doing a clothing swap. I believe it's on March. Yeah, it's March 2nd. They're doing a clothing swap, like a trans-focused clothing swap.
That sounds so fun.
Yeah. Oh, they already did one. I not to brag, but it was my idea.
Nice. It's an awesome idea.
Well, because like they run there's a large homeless population there, and they run a like clothing closet out of the church, and they're always like looking for items. So it's like this is a great way to like one, reach out to the trans community, and two, bring in items, like because like anything that gets like is left over just gets donated. So it's a great way to both like, and you're literally clothing so many people as a result of this, and like that's so awesome. Like that's so cool. It's happening March 2nd. I think it's from 11 to 4. And if you're in the DFW area, totally go there. You can meet me there, and you'll meet a lot of really cool people there. So one of the things that like really frustrates me on the side about this, kind of going back to the Methodist thing, no, we bounced around a lot, but most of the discussions I see taking place, even like on progressive angles, is about the church property, because there's a trust clause that like you can't leave the UMC with your own property if you decide to leave. And like all of this stuff about like, you know, queer affirmation, it seemingly has been like reduced down to that. And it's just like, how about instead we talk about like, you know, the youth suicide rate? How about we talk about the fact that like 30% of LGBTQ plus people like, you know, use marijuana on a regular basis, just triple the rate of the standard population. Not that that's like wrong or anything, but like, you know,
it's a problem if they're doing it, like if they're doing it because they feel sort of like they have no other outlet.
Right. Yeah. And it's just like there's so many of these things that are clearly the fault of the church. And like, you know, those are not the stories that get told at General Conference. There's always a talked about in Methodist circles, like this abstract thing. And it's just like, I want to like grab people and like shake them by the shoulders. And I'm like, I'm fucking right here. Like, fuck the fucking property. That doesn't matter. That's capitalist fucking bullshit. What are you
we're talking about people.
We're talking about real people who are facing consequences.
People who have no voices in the church because they can't be in leadership.
Right. Like, you know, like, just don't have like the opportunity to like even get this stuff. And like, you know, and like and the really frustrating thing, like I expect that from like, you know, non-affirming people. Like that makes sense because a lot of them like just had dehumanized us out of habit at this point. And we are considered a theological problem because our identities are not considered real. But it's really frustrating when like progressives buy into these argumentative frames, because like you're automatically conceding when you buy into like that kind of frame. You're automatically basically saying, yeah, you're right, but like, which is just like kind of roundabout like queerphobia, honestly. Like,
and more well-meaning, but still very problematic.
Right. And like, and again, like, it's really hard to find good allies in a Methodist context because they don't have access. They don't have like the kind of networks of like LGBTQ plus people to learn from, or the access to the theology that could help them. A lot of times you're forced into these frames without even realizing it. And that, and again, it's just harm on top of harm on top of harm. But yeah, the property thing is also like really fucked up just in general, because, you know, if there's any consequences to this, it falls on us. Like, because we either like lose our spaces, or we lose our spaces, we lose our like, you know, path forward as ministers, we lose our like whole church, like as a denomination, we lose these social networks, and it's just, you know, and like that's such bullshit. It's such theological fucking bullshit. I really wish I could take like every delegate who is considering like voting for the traditionalist plan and just be like, you know, just live in my shoes for a day and have to deal with just the stress of this for a day. Just this. Like, because then I feel like I'd hope people would understand then why this is a problem and why what is happening is causing harm.
If your side, our side loses, then we lose real practical things, livelihood and jobs and church. Whereas if the other side loses, they lost a theological debate.
Right. Well, because like they also like, again, a lot of this is motivated by like active bigotry, and like there's definitely plenty of people on that side who see this and see the destruction of progressive spaces as doing the work of God, because they see us as false teachers. And so it's just kind of like, it's not enough to just merely split. It's like, no, we have to defend the word of God and destroy these people. Like a lot of this can lead to like literally genocidal thoughts. There was a General Conference a few years ago. Like we have like a lot of the overseas delegation is very conservative. Obviously, like not every United Methodist who like lives overseas is like super conservative, bigoted. People do a lot of the really racist shit towards the Africa delegation in particular, because like they're seen as the problem delegation, and I'm like, a lot of the theology that led to like the poor theology over there was started over here by these like fundamentalist megachurches. So how about you focus on them because they're the ones really causing the problem, organizing things like the Wesleyan Covenant Association. But there's this one delegate. The only mention was overseas because they were speaking through an interpreter. They're speaking through an interpreter, and it was one of these numerous fucking debates over some like LGBTQ related thing, and the interpreter just refused to interpret what they said, and they're like, yeah, what you said is I'm not interpreting that. Like, that's so vile. I am not interpreting that.
This is Avery from the future. Adam emailed me after we talked. They emailed me a link to an article about what happened with the interpreter, and basically what the delegate said in Swahili was that saying that a homosexual person was created by God is like saying that God created me to live with animals. The translator did eventually translate it, but apologized while doing so. And of course, as Adam was sure to mention, this is not an issue of good, affirming American Methodists versus homophobic African Methodists. There are plenty of homophobic Americans, just as there are plenty of affirming Africans.
The Wesleyan Covenant Association feels perfectly fine with allying with those people. Like, they're perfectly comfortable with making, like, allyship with people who, if given the chance, would kill us. Like, and that's what sends home to me what this is really about. Like, it's not about, like, abstract theology. It's not about, like, you hate us. The things are going good. I'm in the Methodist Church right now. Working as an office manager during this is very interesting too. Like a bit of a lighter note, because I handle a lot of the church like bureaucracy stuff, and so like I have like forms I have to turn in for the conference or like things like to update for them. Like I was updating like the church like leadership roster for like the annual conference, and I feel like I'm like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, and I'm like, yeah, this is really cool that I'm doing this. And I'm like, is any of this going to exist in 2 weeks? Like,
oh my gosh, yeah.
Everyone's just like going about like this is completely normal and nothing's happening, and it's just kind of like I don't know how I want people to be acting, but this doesn't feel appropriate. Like, the thing about like schism is the denomination breaking up is like, you know, it might be the most just way going forward, but it's not something that's kind of like, you know, I'm necessarily going to be like jumping up and down and celebrating, because like you're losing connection with other people. You're losing like, you know, your ability to do like really good work, just as like being part of a large organization that can like, you know, manage funds and get like UMCOR, like the United Methodist Community of Relief is like, we're like one of like, the UMCOR is like one of the like first groups that like shows up like any natural disaster. Like there's like super huge part of like disaster recovery for like the hurricanes we had, or like tornadoes or earthquakes, like what have you. Like UMCOR is always there, and that's the thing that would probably go away, you know. And also like all the churches that are gonna get split apart and probably have to close their doors, like or all the people who might get, and these are like, you know, get or like queer kids who are growing up in like or even adults like in like non-affirming churches, like, you know, like they like, even if like the one church plan passes, they don't have like that hope, and they especially don't have that hope if their church decides to leave the denomination. And that's like all of that's like just, it's sad. It's just genuinely sad. And even if it's like, you know, a better quote unquote outcome where like at least some churches get that kind of get the freedom that they to be just towards LGBTQ plus people, like there's still so much that needs to be done, like, and so much like injustice that's still there. And then again, you just lose like the resources thing, and that's just disappointing. And it's, you know, because it's happening for no reason. And it was something that if we had better leadership that didn't just want to hide this under the rug and valued unity above justice, like we maybe could have stayed united and could have figured this out. And then, you know, this is what happens. This is what
Yeah.
happens when you ignore sin.
Wow.
It festers and it causes harm and it leads to the ending of relationship and community and connection. Like, that's what it does.
That needs to be a sermon because that'll preach. That
Did,
will
did,
preach.
did I mention I'm going into ordained ministry?
Yes. I look forward to hearing how that goes for you because I think your voice is really needed.
I'm currently
Yeah.
one step away. If you want to let go, I'm in the ordination process.
Uh-huh.
So I got so my first process was going before like the pastor. You go before your
Right.
pastor. Then your pastor passes you on to your staff parish relations committee of the church you've been a member at. You have to be a member for a year. And I've been at Arapahoe for a while, so that's like no problem.
Mhm.
And then they will send you to it wasn't annual conference. I think it's like district conference or something. They send you to another like bureaucratic like meeting where it's
Yeah.
like a bunch of people from other like like other like churches and stuff are also there. And then they
Mhm.
sign off on you, and then you go to the district superintendent. And once the district attendant signs off on you, you become a certified, what's called a certified candidate. And after that, you can get access to scholarships, like all the fun stuff that like basically gives you the tools to go forward and be ordained.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I got stuck at the certified candidate process because I'm in a relationship.
Mm.
Like that's where I got stuck. That was the particular district superintendent's interpretation, which like I'm salty about, but also I understand that to some extent her hands are tied because like if she loses her job, the person who's going to replace her isn't going to be more affirming anyways. And I know she wants
No.
to ordain
Yeah.
me. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, she's like, I want to ordain you. Like you were clearly called to ministry, but
Mhm.
like, look, I mean, there's like nothing I can do. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's like bullshit when you like also force people into these kind of like, this kind of like weird loyalty test kind of thing. Like that's
Yeah.
also like horse shit. But
Yeah.
um,
Where they have to act against what they believe
right.
out of
And
fear. Yeah. That's really sucky.
yeah, and the hope she basically explained to me it's like I was like there's gonna be like a little bit of like a lead time if like the one church plan gets approved, but like she's pretty confident that our annual conference would vote to ordain. Like we have enough progressive leaning churches in the delegation to like kind of like win that vote basically.
Mhm.
But but there would still be like a lag time of a few months, and so it's like my schedule is like a little accelerated because which I wonder how that works out because she said it would be like the summer before like all that would have been squared away, and it might happen at like annual conference where like this vote gets taken, which is again the sub conference of like stupid Methodist bureaucracy stuff. God.
Yeah.
um, but and yeah, so that's kind of like just how all of that works. I think one of the cool things, I know I have a lot of sides here because I'm very scatterbrained. But I remember I was really agonizing because you have to write up a call statement. Um, and I was really agonizing about this and like, how much of like do like I put forward here? Because like knowing that I like there's a very real chance I'm gonna get stopped at some point in the process. And I
Mhm.
go to the pastor at Chapel Hill, the church I work at, and go, you call me in for something else, like to talk to me. And I was like, yeah, I'm working on my call statement. And I'm like, kind of like figuring out like what should I put in here? Kind of like hinting that like, hey, it's about like the queer stuff. Like, and he just
Yeah.
looked at me, he just said, you put the truth. Like, you put the truth. Like, because, if you don't, then they will know. Like, because, you know, your call and your identity are so tied up together
Yeah.
that like if you exclude all of that it doesn't make sense and it's not like you lose the impact of it like you can't lie your way well, you can lie your way to the ordination process but you not to that extent. Like,
Uh-huh.
but and that like really stuck with me. Like, just kind of like, you know, and I think the thing about this is, I don't know, is like I'm going to be in ministry. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even if like the UMC like implodes on itself, even if like all of like my immediate church resources like go away, like,
Mm-hmm.
that would not be great. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't want that to happen. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if that Lord take away this cup from me, please don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of deal. But like, I am called by God to be part of be a ministry, and
Mm-hmm.
that institutions can't stop that. Like, that's not a thing that's gonna stop. Like, that's not
Yeah.
gonna stop happening just because like some random pastor somewhere says I shouldn't be doing it, and it's like, no, like God says I should be doing it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get a choice. uh,
Yes.
and I think that's what's like. I don't know what that's gonna like necessarily look like in the future,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
like there's also like once the healing processes can begin, that something like beautiful can happen. I don't know what that looks like,
Yeah.
but I have a lot of, I've seen what the, like, the Holy Spirit can do through me. I've seen that. And like that's not knowing that's not going to go away is like the one thing that like provides me a lot of comfort right now is just like, this is going to happen. Like come hell or high water, it's going to happen.
That is so beautiful.
Thank you. I honestly think like maybe it's just because I've been through a lot of like bullshit. Like, and it's not like I don't have my doubts from time to time, but
Sure.
and obviously there's nothing wrong with doubts, and there's nothing wrong with
Mm-hmm.
having like, a more tenuous connection to the faith.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't think like I'm honestly at the point in my life where like I don't think I could not believe. Like, just because I have seen the things that I've seen, at least for me, feel so divinely inspired. Like, again, it's the Wesleyan experience thing. It's like, like you're seeing the fruits of the spirit, and you're like, yeah, like, ignoring all the historical accuracies in the Bible, like, like this is what I know, that I can see this, like
Yeah.
this is it. Like, I mean, and there also is a part of it that's like motivated by spite, because when people tell me I can't do things, I go out of my way to do them.
Yes.
Not necessarily I shouldn't, because sometimes people tell me like, hey, you shouldn't, I don't know, like dump boiling water on your head, and it's just kind of like, yeah, obviously shouldn't do that. But it's like
Yeah.
people tell me like, no, you can't be a minister because you're queer, and I'm like, I'm gonna be like the most Christiany Christian that
Yes.
you ever fucking see.
Yes.
I just like
Yeah.
double down.
Spite
um,
can be a really powerful motivator. Yeah.
this has been the wonderfully cathartic conversation.
Yeah,
If
I'm glad to hear that. So that wraps up this episode, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. It really was such a wonderful thing to get to sit with a real live Methodist to discuss what's going on with the UMC right now. I hope that all of you will join me in praying for the United Methodist Church as this General Conference gets underway very shortly. After this episode, we'll be back on our normal schedule, so you can tune in, not this coming Sunday, but the one after that, and we'll be back to our every other week schedule. In the meantime, go break some binaries and bless the world with your life.